Oi oi internet! This is the very first video I'm going to be doing in a series of web scraping videos for beginners with Python. So in this video what we're going to do, we're going to take the simplest data you could possibly imagine, the simplest data for web scraping, because this is for beginners. We're going to take tabular data, data from a table. As we can see here, we have a nice little table from this little website here, link in the doobly-doo. And we're going to take the data from there and we're going to present it to the user. So the user will know what the time of the sunset and the sunrise is on the current day. Ooh, wow, isn't that exciting? Okay, without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so open in Terminal and your favorite text editor of choice. In my case, I'm using Atom. Let's start doing some stuff. So let's make that bigger. Let's make this bigger. I should have done this beforehand, but I didn't because I'm a clown. There we go. Right. So let's say import requests. Then we'll import from BS4. We shall import beautiful soup, and I'll import it as BS because I can't be bothered to type beautiful soup all the time. Then we also want to import from datetime. We want to import the date. So we can match the date that is on the website with the date that we are currently on. You'll see what we're going to do that is. So let's start out by just looking at the website. What have we got here? Well, we've got this table. So we need to get the data from this table. Okay, so what we can do first is we can use this thing called inspect element. Right click, click inspect. And the reason you would want to right click and click inspect as opposed to saying doing Command Alt J, which will bring up the same window, is because you can literally select the specific element you want to get to without having to sort through all the HTML manually. And in some cases it can be very annoying to do such a thing. So in this case we've got the table here. We can see we've got a div. So a div is just a sort of a dividing element in the HTML. For those of you that don't know, I should also make this bigger. So what we have here in this little window, we have the HTML. So HTML is a markup language used for the website. It's the standard. It stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And the structure of the document is essentially this. So we open with the HTML. We say, okay, this is a HTML document. We also have something called the head of the document. This contains things like the title. So when we go back to Google Chrome, if we have a look at the top of the page in the tab, I'm in Chrome, I should have done this. If we look at that, the top of the tab here, we've got this bit where it says sunrise sometimes in London. Well, where that's coming from this title here. We also have some meta descriptions. We have things like the description of the website. These are the things that show up in search engines. We have some other stuff like links for CSS files. That gives the website the style it has. Then we have some JavaScript scripts which are just going to give the website some additional functionality. In the case here, this one is a Google Ads script. So it will enable the users of the Google to display ads on this website. Then the most important bit for our purposes, at least for this video, is the body element. The body element is, and if we show Chrome at the same time, that is the whole of the website. That's where the main content of the website lives. And what we can see here is we have these next elements. So we have one called a nav. A nav is just this is just a type of an element that we have in an HTML document. As you can see, as I highlight over it, it's the top bit here. That's the nav. Okay, you can see we have something called a class here. Now, in this class, we have some words separated by spaces, and these relate to the CSS classes we have here. And in fact, we can look in this little inspect tab. You can see down here we have navbar in inverse, so dot navbar inverse. So we can see that relates to this bit here, and this is telling us what background colors we have. So if we untick that, you can see at the top there, the background color just changed. Tick it back on, it comes back on. And all we're doing here is we're saying we have many classes that this particular element relates to, so it's going to be styled in a number of different ways. And what's useful, why we're talking about this for our purposes, is because using the class of an element is quite useful if we want to actually get that data using Beautiful Soup. You'll see what we mean when we get to it. I'm just giving you sort of a basic introduction now to HTML. We also have this thing called role. We don't really need to concern ourselves with that for web scraping. That's just another tag that gives some information about the element. We have these things called divs. These are just dividing elements. They're probably the most common element you'll see. There's something else which I'm trying to look for at the moment, but I can't see one. There's also another thing you can have as opposed to a class. Well, in addition to a class in some cases, you can have a div with an ID. Now, if you do see an ID or any element that has an ID, we always want to prefer using that to classes because IDs are typically and should always be unique. They're not always. There will be cases where they're not unique, but they really should be unique, which means when we want to scrape it, we can say, get me this element with this ID, and it will just get you that single element you want. In terms of classes, you can see that, we have this col SM12, and we have one that's called rows. There are multiple ones that have the element row. So if we say get me the row, it's going to get you all of them. Or in the case of you saying get me one of the rows, it's not going to know which one to get. So that's what we're going to do here. We also have this table. So we're going to be looking for this table. We're going to be looking for the table with this class. And a table has a head again. So it has the header rows here. So this is the header row. And it also has all of the rows themselves, and these are so each header row has a row. So TR is a table row, and within that we will also have the cells. These are TD. That's TD in the HTML, and those will contain the things like the actual text inside that table, inside the cell. So I've rambled long enough about HTML. Let's get down to doing some web scraping. Okay, so the first thing we need to do, let's get this URL, copy that, and we'll come back to Atom and we'll say, just declare this URL as a global variable to make things easy, like that. And next we need to do something where we get the Beautiful Soup object. So what we're going to do is we're going to say soup is equal to BS, so that's Beautiful Soup. And the constructor for the Beautiful Soup object has two parameters. We need to pass it in the HTML text. So we need to basically load what we were just looking at. We need to load all of this text into the first parameter. And the second parameter is the type of parser we're going to be using on this. So you'll see what that means in a second. So how do we get the text? Well, we can use that requests module. We can say .get, and we can pass in the URL. Now what that returns is it returns a response object that has a number of different fields like status codes, for example. So if all is well, we should expect the status code of 200. I'm not going to get too much into what status codes are about in this video because it's not really relevant here. But what we're going to say is we're going to say .text. We want to get the text from the response object. We want to get that HTML text for the first parameter. And the next thing we want to get is we want to say, we're going to be using the HTML parser, and that's because we're using HTML. There are alternative parsers we can use, but for this, we're just going to be using the HTML parser. Okay, so we've got that. Let's have a look and see what we get back from that soup object. So we're going to print it just temporarily and see what we get. So we say Python main.py. Oh, there's an error. I have messed something up. I've typed that there. We'll try it again. Okay, there we go. So what we can see here is we actually do have all of the HTML. Brilliant. So we can get rid of this print line now, and we can get on with properly scraping. So there are actually two tables on this website. So there's the table here, and there's also another table. So let's show what issues we can see if we would just find the table. So let's say we look at this and we go, oh, there's one table, and we only see that there's one table. There's two, but we're going to assume for the minute that there's one. So say table is equal to soup.find, and we're going to say table. Okay? And then let's print that table and just see what we find. Okay? Come back and we'll do this. Okay. So it's printing everything, but it's also got some additional stuff here that we didn't want. This might be hard to see, but essentially what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're specifically getting the table that we want and not any other table. So how do we do this? Well, one of the things we can do with this find method is we can specify attributes of the HTML tag that we're trying to get hold of. Now, when looking at this table a minute ago, we noticed that it had a class. So let's inspect this. Again, we'll look for the top of the table. Here it is, and this has this class here. So it's got two attributes in the class. We're going to copy the whole thing, and then we're going to add this to our little find method. So we're going to say comma attributes, and we'll pass. This is an object, so we say equals these weird curly braces things. We'll say the class comma, and then we'll pass in that class we just found there, and that will now get the correct table. It's not going to be much point in me printing that out because it's hard to see which table we have got, which I realised when I printed it out last time. So now we want to try and get hold of the table rows. Okay, there are many table rows, so what are we going to do? Well, we've got the table, so we want to go and get the table rows that are contained within the table. Bit of fun. So we can say rows is equal to table. So no, we're not calling the soup.find now, because what we have now is we have a beautiful soup object that is really only composed of this table that we've found. So we say find, and we're looking for the table body, like that, and then we're just going to say find underscore all, and we're going to look for table rows, like that. Again, let's just print this to see that it's working correctly. Okay, hard to see, but it has printed out many of the things. If we're looking at this now, you can see, okay, so it's got a date here. It's got another date here. This looks to be the sort of thing we're after in this table. So looking again at this table, we have some times and we have some dates. And so this looks like it's getting the correct thing. Okay. So what we want to say is we want to now iterate through this, so we can use a for loop for that. We can say for row in rows. And one of the things that I noticed earlier is that there's a final row that has some data that we just want to ignore. So in this case, we're just going to say ignore the last row. So take that final row out of this iteration, ignore it, and this should all work fine. So now let's start getting all the cells. So what cells do we have? Well, let's just print this row, right, for now. We'll just print these rows and see what happens. And what actually we'll do instead here, we'll just print the first one, just for the time being, so we don't clog up the output. There we go. Wow. What we have here then is we've got that first row we were looking for. We've got this one here. I've clicked the wrong thing. We've got that. So if we look at that, we can see December the 1st, 7:43. Let's check that's right. Sunset is that time. Brilliant. So now we know what's going to be contained in every single one of these rows that we're iterating through. So let's start working with that data. So we can say date cell, and we want to go row find now because we're working with this, and we want to, in this case, because these don't have classes, apart from this very first one, it's a bit of an awkward one to deal with in terms of just saying, well, find me the row. What we can do though is we can say find all, and we can say td, because these are, td elements, and we can then just pass in the index because we're going to get an array. So as we've done here, I just need to remember to put this back. As we've done here, we've said table find and then find me all of these. This returns an array of all of the elements we have. So we can do the same thing here. We can say row find all, and we can just say get me the first element. Remember, we're starting with 0. So this one here is what we're going to return. And again, we can just try this, and we can print the date cell. I'm not going to print every single thing out every single time we do this, just so we can sort of see what's going off. We'll print it, And of course now what we've done is we've printed out every single one of the rows because I've changed this back. But we've printed out only the very first row. So we'll only get the one that has the actual date in there. So that's working. So in order to get the others, well, all we need to do, because remember there are 4 of these rows, looking back at the table, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. We only need to do this. So we see summarize cell, that's equal to row find all, again, TD. And we do this. Brilliant. Let's just copy this. And we'll say sunset. And we'll say day length is equal to the third one. So we'll say day length is equal to the third one. Okay, so now we can do some stuff. So if we can print this out in any way we feel like it. So we could say, you know, let's print out I don't know, sunrise. And if we say .text on that, it'll only print out the text. So we're going to get all we're expecting to see here when we print this out is we're expecting to see these bits of text from this row to print out. So the last thing we're going to see is 806. Okay, so let's try that now. With the terminal. There we go. The last thing we see, 806. So that looks like it's correct. And come back. Let's start doing some stuff now. Okay, what we can do now is we can only print out the one that we want to print out. So we want to say, oh, what's the sunrise sunset time going to be today? Maybe we just want to run this Python script on a cron job and it will just send us some information about what the sunrise sunset time is. So what we can do here is we can say, we need to get the date time. So we can say date cell dot text. Okay. We also want to get some other stuff about here. So we notice here this is a bit of a weird one because this is a link. So we want to get the date time here. We want to get this because what Python's datetime module outputs will be this. So we can match that and figure out which row we want to print out. But we also maybe want to print this one because it's more human readable. So we've got to do 2 things here. So we've got to say datecell.text. So datecell.text is going to print out this 18th of December in this case. And it's also going to print out Wednesday. And the reason for that is all we're talking about here is what's in between the elements. If that makes sense. I explained that very poorly. Then we can also say, we can overwrite the date cell one now, and we can just say datecell.find, and we're going to look for this time element here. So time, remember there's only one because we're only looking at this one particular cell, even though we're iterating over all of them. At the moment we're only looking at a single one. And we can say, get me the date time, like this. Okay. Let's just see what we get for these. So we'll print out the date time and we will also print out the date cell again. Okay, print it out. What do we get? As I said, we'd get the text and we'd also get the date time. What we can now do is we can now only print out the specific day that it is today. So let's define a global variable up here and we'll call it today and we'll say it's a string. So we're going to cast this to a string. We'll say date.today, like that. So we've imported this date here. We'll just say date.today, really easy. Then we can say if date cell is equal to today, then we want to print some stuff out. Okay. So let's go ahead and start doing some stuff. So what we can do is we can get the sunrise date time. So this is in case we want to actually, instead of maybe printing out the text, we want to get the actual date time, which is present in the sunrise time. So look here, this is also a date time. So this is better if we want to handle do processing with the data than it is just getting this string here. So if we want to get the date time, for example, we can just do that. same way we did it previously. So we can say sunrise dot find time, and then we do date time like that. And we can do the same for the sunset. Sunset dot find time, and then we go to date time. Then we want to get the day length. So let's look at the next row, the last one. And here it has a very weird date time. So really let's say we just want to get the text for that one. So we can just do day length dot find time dot text. There we go. And then we can just print everything out. So we can say print date time, print date cell, and print sunrise, print sunset. There we go. And print the day length. So what we're expecting to see from the output of this program now is one row gets printed, and it's the day that relates to today. So what day is it today? It is the 28th of December. So clear the output, run the program. What happens? We have some calamitous mistake. What have I done wrong here? I've not put the equal sign there. There we go. And there we are. So it's the 28th of December. It printed out the correct time. There we are. So hopefully this has been useful. In this video, we've gone through what you can do to actually get data from a website into a program. We've ran through some of the ways you can get specific elements. So we've said, oh, look, we want to find the table. Or maybe you will want to find all of a number of the elements, as we would with a table. And then maybe we want to drill down and get some of the more specific cells. So we can do that here. And then we've also gone ahead and got some types of the data. So we've gone, well, we'll get the date time as opposed to just getting the text that's in the cell. Or maybe we want to get the text of the cell, so it's then called the .text method. And then we've printed that out to the console so that the user can see it. So very basic, just gone through what we can do with web scraping as a basic example, and how we can add conditionals. So we can take the data and we say, well, if this data matches this current date, for example, then we want to do something with that data. If not, we want to just ignore it. This has been the first video in this series. There are going to be some more videos. In the future, we are going to look at how you can download files using web scraping. So we'll deal with downloading MP3 files, downloading image files. We'll also show you how you can download PDFs in terms of maybe you see part of a book somewhere and you see part of a book somewhere else. You can download each individual file and turn it into a PDF. They're coming in the future. So hopefully you've enjoyed this beginner's tutorial. If you have any questions, leave them down below. I'll try and answer them as soon as possible. Thank you very much for watching.